The authorities said that 10-day-old baby girl, Delimar Vera, perished in a house fire. But her mother was convinced she'd been abducted. Number 3. On the 15th of December 1997, just a couple of days before Christmas, a fire started in the Philadelphia home of Luz Cuevas. The mother of three fought her way through the smoke and flames, making her way to the room where her 10-day-old daughter, Delimar, was sleeping in her crib. Once Luz entered the room, she was mortified. There was no sign of her baby. The crib was empty and the window was open. As Luz searched for Delimar, she suffered burns to her face and nearly passed out due to smoke inhalation. Luz continued to make her way out of the house with her two other children. Luz was screaming that her baby had been stolen, but investigators told her that it was just her nerves. Delimar was sleeping in the upstairs front bedroom when the fire broke out at her family's two-story row house. The firefighters were able to put out the blaze relatively quickly. Most of the flames were contained in the baby's room. Authorities searched for the newborn, but ultimately determined that Delimar had perished in the fire. The cause of the fire was ruled as accidental and was caused by an overheated extension cord on a space heater. No human remains were found, but the investigators came to the conclusion that any remains had been incinerated by the flames. Luz was, however, convinced that her child had been kidnapped. The authorities closed the case because there was no evidence of foul play or a kidnapping. For 6 years, Luz mourned the loss of her baby girl, but she never stopped wondering what had truly happened to her. While at a birthday party for an acquaintance in 2004, Luz saw a little girl with dark hair who looked strikingly like her other children. She also had the same unmistakable dimples as her baby daughter. To make things even stranger, the little girl was the exact same age as Delimar. As she watched the little girl, who was named Aaliyah, play, she became convinced that the young girl was actually her Delimar. Luz came up with a plan and pretended to help the little girl get bubblegum out of her hair when in reality she obtained some of the girl's hair for her DNA. A state legislator assisted her in getting the police to open an investigation and test the hair for DNA. The test proved that 6-year-old Aaliyah Hernandez was actually her daughter, Delimar Vera. The woman who kidnapped Delimar was 42-year-old Carolyn Correa, a cousin of the child's father, Pedro Vera. Luz and Carolyn had only met the day before the fire when Carolyn came by the house. The following day, Carolyn returned, claiming she had left her purse upstairs. The blaze started as she left the house. Delimar, still going by Aaliyah, was reunited with her parents the next year in 2004, who were both given custody. Her abductor was convicted of kidnapping, arson, assault, concealing the whereabouts of a child, and interfering with the custody of a child. Carolyn Correa was later convicted and sentenced to between 9 and 30 years in prison. Police would go on to say that they cannot fully explain why Delimar was pronounced dead. Officers at the time found bone fragments they thought were the baby's remains, but tests later showed them to be non-human. When investigators returned to the scene, firemen had already dumped several hundred pounds of debris from the gutted bedroom in the backyard. The officers sifted through the debris but found mostly dry wool particles, which they were told resemble human ashes, but only those burned at 1,000 degrees for an hour or longer, McDevitt said. The fire, which was confined to the bedroom, lasted only about 15 minutes and was nowhere near 1,000 degrees. On the other hand, officers had no reason to suspect arson or kidnapping. Number 2. Police responded to reports of shots fired in Southern California in 1922. Once on site, they found a petrified woman named Dolly Oesterreich locked in the closet. Her husband, Fred, had been shot dead and was lying on the bedroom floor. All signs pointed to a robbery gone wrong, and this is also what Dolly told the police had happened. This case would, however, not be so simple. Dolly and Fred William Oesterreich had been married for about 25 years at the time of the shooting. Fred worked long hours, and even if he was home, he preferred the company of a bottle of whiskey more than that of his wife. From the beginning of their marriage, Dolly was rumored to have invited many lovers into her home during the day while Fred worked at the mills. In 1913, when Dolly was 33 years old, she met 17-year-old Otto Sanhuber, who was sent over by Fred to repair Dolly's sewing machine. Otto was working for Fred at his factory. Shortly afterward, Otto and Dolly began having an intense affair. At first, to avoid suspicion from her neighbors, Dolly would explain that Otto was her vagabond half-brother. After a while, they were, however, afraid of getting caught by nosy neighbors or someone they knew. Booking into a hotel or motel was also a major inconvenience, and they still had the risk of getting caught. Dolly then came up with an excellent idea. She would hide Otto in her attic, which was accessible through a panel in the ceiling of the closet of the bedroom that Dolly shared with her husband. Otto was supplied with a cot, food, a lamp, books, and writing materials. During the day, Otto and Dolly would cavort around the house, make bathtub gin, and spend as much time together as they liked. He would also perform housework in the residence. At night when Fred returned home, Otto retreated to the attic to write and read science fiction novels and hide until the following day in total silence. Dolly would mail his novels to potential publishers for him. Otto would later claim that he had been Dolly's sex slave and that they sometimes made love up to 8 times a day. At this time Fred was completely unaware of Otto's presence. In 1918 the Oesterreichs moved from Milwaukee to Los Angeles. Dolly agreed to the move on the condition that she would choose their new home, deliberately picking a house with an attic, which is a rarity in Los Angeles. Otto moved ahead of the Oesterreichs and was already installed in the Los Angeles attic before their arrival, where his affair with Dolly resumed. On the 22nd of August 1922, 9 years after their affair had started, Otto heard Dolly and Fred arguing loudly. Otto believed Dolly to be in danger and emerged from the attic. He retrieved 2.25 caliber pistols from the bedroom. When Fred saw Otto, a struggle over the guns ensued, and Fred was shot 3 times and killed. Dolly gave Otto all the money in the bedroom, as well as Fred's diamond watch. Otto set the scene by locking Dolly in the closet and hiding himself away in the attic, along with the guns. Neighbors who heard the gunshots called the police. Once they arrived, some investigators believed Dolly was involved in her husband's death, but could not explain how she could have locked herself into the closet. For years, police had to believe Dolly's story of a robbery gone wrong, as there was simply no evidence to the contrary. After the death of Fred, Otto continued to live in the attic for another 8 years. All that changed in Otto and Dolly's relationship was that Otto was permitted a typewriter, since there was no longer anyone to hear him use it. At this time Dolly was also having an affair with her personal attorney, Herman Shapiro. She had hired Herman after she was suspected of Fred's death. In 1930, Herman became suspicious after Dolly gave him the diamond watch she had reported stolen by the burglars who murdered Fred. Dolly told him that she had found the watch in the front yard and that the thieves must have dropped it while fleeing the scene. Roy Klum, another of Dolly's lovers, discovered that she was having an affair with Herman. He went to the police and informed them that Dolly had asked him to ditch a gun in the nearby tar pits shortly after the murder. A neighbor also came forward saying that Dolly had similarly asked him to bury a gun for her. She claimed that the gun too closely resembled the gun that killed Fred and that she did not want to get into trouble. The neighbor buried the gun under a rosebush in his garden. Police were able to recover the pistols from both locations. Although badly decayed, both weapons were determined to be of the same caliber that killed Fred. She was arrested under suspicion of murder. While Dolly was in jail, she confided to Herman that her vagabond half-brother was living in the attic of her home and asked Herman to check on his well-being. Herman made his way to his lover's home and knocked on the trapdoor leading to the attic. He was greeted by Otto, who was thin, pale, but still cordial. As they spoke, Otto explained his true relationship with Dolly and eventually confessed to his role in the murder. Otto was arrested and convicted of manslaughter. He was released later on because the statute of limitations had expired. He changed his name to Walter Klein and moved to Canada. He married another woman, then eventually relocated back to Los Angeles and lived the remainder of his life in obscurity. Dolly's trial ended in a hung jury, with most of the jurors leaning towards acquittal, and in 1936 the indictment against her was dropped. She remained in Los Angeles until she died in 1961, at age 80. Number 1. When 2 men enjoying a summer dinner of roasted beef and canned beans dropped dead in Autun-du-Perche, the small French village found itself at the center of what seemed to be a sinister mystery. On the 3rd of August 2017, a neighbor found the bodies of 2 Frenchmen, 69-year-old Lucien Perot and 38-year-old Olivier Boudin. Their lives seemed to have ended while they were enjoying a lavish dinner. Olivier was lying on his back and Lucien was sitting at the terrace table before a half-finished plate. With no obvious signs of a struggle or break-in, the Autun-du-Perche police assumed that the 2 men had died from food poisoning. But when testing by the famous Pasteur Institute in Paris concluded that the meal didn't contain any botulism, a mysterious murder was suddenly on the table. A whodunit fit for a Sherlock Holmes novel. Patrice Lediget, the local mayor, told journalists the dinner scene looked as if time had suddenly stopped. One of their neighbors said that the 2 men led simple lives and had no enemies. At the local Au Bon Coin Bistert, the owner said the pair regularly dined and drank together and were like father and son. But who had killed these men? And how? The police found no signs of a struggle. The mysterious case gripped the nation. There were all sorts of rumors going around. But curiosity quickly turned depressing when doctors finally determined the real cause of death. Poor Lucien had literally bit off more than he could chew. He choked to death on a 1.5 ounces, or 44 grams chunk of beef steak. He also had a blood alcohol level of 2.4 grams per liter. But despite all this, why didn't Olivier help his friend? In an unfortunate event either caused by fate or poor timing, Olivier suffered a heart attack triggered by the sight of his lifelong friend slowly choking to death. He had a genetic heart condition that was a contributing factor. When the news was revealed, locals were heartbroken by such a stupid death, but they did respect the overwrought metaphor for the fleeting pointlessness of man. Thank you very much for watching. We appreciate all the support.